Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is self-expression. So there are many, many laws in the Torah that have to do with speech, okay? Oh, I see you've been learning this. Is that accurate? In which case we will do something else. Did you do this thing, the stunning power of speech?
Yeah, we have that next class.
Okay, so we are not going to do this. We're going to do something else, okay? Okay, good, I noticed that. It would have ruined her day. Okay, so we're going to do instead, there are three basic aspects of self that are called the garments of the soul. Those are thought, speech, and action. Okay, so we spoke last time about thought when we were going on about motivation. And you're going to be hearing in another class about speech. So what we're going to do today is action. So to understand the significance of action, realize that when you're talking about self-change, there are two different directions. One is moving from the inside out. So for instance, the thoughts and words you tell yourself are going to affect the way you think, and from there the way you speak, and from there what you do. But there's another path. The other path is changing from the outside in, where what you do actually changes the way you perceive things and ultimately the way you think. So I'm going to illustrate both of these paths. So changing from the inside out. Imagine somebody who suffered, I'll give you a true story. There's a book called The Holy Woman. Did any of you ever see it? It was very popular at its time. So I'm going to tell you her life story the way I would tell it, and then I'm going to tell you the way she tells it. Okay? So she grew up in Hungary before the war. She was very close to her parents, a beloved child. When she was 16, her parents made a match for her, and she got married. Her attachment to her parents was so great that she made it part of her engagement document that her husband had to promise that he would never make her move further than walking distance from her parents. Okay? The war broke out soon afterwards. He was taken out way at the beginning and killed. And she had loved him. Okay, so she went back to her parents' home. As the war progressed, she and her parents were arrested. She saw her parents killed mamash right in front of her in Auschwitz. They were both shot. Okay, she was sent to the right to survive. She was selected to be in Dr. Mengele's control group. Do you know what I'm talking about? The way it worked is if, let's say, he was experimenting, how cold does water have to be before somebody suffers brain damage? So he did those sorts of experiments and documented them. So one person would be thrown into a pool of ice and would suffer X amount of brain damage. Another person who was not thrown into the pool of ice would have to do, let's say, mathematical problems to see to what degree this person who was in the ice could no longer do problems they had done before, and how that would compare to another person who was totally from a different background. Okay, clear? Most of his experiments were with twins. Okay, but yeah, because their genetic history would be identical. But some of them were not. The result of his experiments upon her was that she couldn't have children. I don't know anything more of the details, but that was the bottom line. Okay, she survived the war. She was sent to a DP camp. The people in the camp eventually made their way to Israel. In Israel, she lived in Yerushalayim. She was still young. We're talking about somebody in her mid-20s. Okay, so she was living in Yerushalayim. She found other religious people. They suggested a second marriage to her. Her second husband was a Kabbalist, and he wanted to live far away from the city where he could meditate. So he took her to live in the north of Israel, to a small town. Okay, nobody came from her social background. Nobody was Yiddish speaking. Everybody was Sephardic or Romanian. She had nothing in common with anybody there. She had no way of earning a living there. It was a small village with no employment possibilities. They were terribly poor. Because social services in Israel in those years were so extremely undeveloped, people saw her as someone who has like lots of leisure. She doesn't have a job. She doesn't have children. So they would continually ask her to do favors for them. So she was like, the words I would use would be continually taken advantage of by other people. to the point that because she was free to babysit, at one point she had 7 special needs children more or less living in her house. Okay, eventually her husband died. She went back to Yerushalayim to live. I met her when she was old. She was living in an apartment, and she had one of these special needs children's parent abandoned him. At this point, he was a middle-aged man in his 50s. Okay, does that sound like a terrible life? Yes? How many would say this is awful? Okay. Now I'm going to tell you how she told her own story. Now, she, when you would say hello to her, she had like smile lines on her face. She was like very joyous, very, very bubbly. So people thought she had a great power of prayer, so they would often bring people to her for blessings. So there's a girl here at Neve who was in her late 30s and who hadn't found someone and who was very depressed and wanted to go to someone for bracha, so I took her there. So the girl said, look, I know it's in God's hands, not my hands, but I'm so depressed. Like, my biological clock is ticking. I'm never going to have a child. I always wanted this more than anything else. I feel like my life is finished. I'm only 38. And and she was crying. And then she said to her, you never had children. How do you smile? How do you live your life? So here's how she told her story. How could you compare your situation to mine? Don't be so hard on yourself. Your life is so hard. My life has always been easy. You're worried about finding the right man. My parents who loved me found me the perfect match when I was only 16. I never had a date. I never had to face rejection. I never had to ask any questions. And my parents were wonderful. And even during the war, when people were dying to my left and to my right, and even my parents died, it was as though I had an invisible protective shield around me. No matter what happened, I survived. So I always felt I was being looked after. And after the war, I was taken to Israel. No one in my family was ever to Israel. It was my father's dream. When peddlers would come to our town with Jaffa oranges, he would pay $20 for 3 oranges because they were from Israel. And I got to live in Jerusalem. And not only that, I remarried after the war. My husband had died. I married a Kabbalist. Nobody in our family was a Torah scholar. My father had a store. My brothers also. They always respected learning, but nobody, I never thought I would ever have a match like him. And you know what he did? He took me all the way to the north in Israel. I had to learn Hebrew. I could have lived the same day again and again and again until I died, but he made me redefine myself. I learned Hebrew. I made friends to people from a whole different social group, and they let me have their children. And here, meet Maishla. Maishla was 54. He stays with me. I'm never alone. How could you compare your life? You're so lonely. You have nobody. How could you compare your life to my life? And she was completely sincere. So I'm listening to her narrative of her life, and and I said, wait a minute. There must be times when you were depressed. Isn't that true? So she said, well, it's not really in my nature. She was about to go on about how wonderful her life was, but I stopped her. I said, when you saw your parents killed, how did you respond? So she said, I will never forget this. She said, my parents died because they were Jewish. They died al Kiddush Hashem. They died good deaths. What kind of a daughter would I be if I didn't want that kind of a death for them? Everyone's going to die, but their deaths were noble. So I tried one more time. I said, was there ever a time when you were in the concentration camps that you actually gave in to what was going along and wept? She said, one time. So here was her story. It was after the camp was liberated. It was liberated by the Russians. So they sent trucks to take people to DP camps. But nobody knew what was really going on. So they didn't know if they wouldn't get on the truck, maybe the Germans would retake it. Maybe the tides of war would change. They had no media. So when the trucks came, everybody was piling themselves on the trucks. So she tried to get on, but other people beat her to it. So she was climbing on top of other people to get into the back of the truck. And she got on. And the driver, the truck was so overloaded it wouldn't move. And he was a Russian. He was coarse and vulgar, a peasant. He picked her up by her leg and threw her off the truck. So she said, so I sat on the dirt as I saw the truck leave the camp. I didn't know whether I would ever get out. And I began to cry. The truck crossed a bridge that I could see. The Germans had laid explosives on the bridge. And I never cried again in my life. She saw the whole truck that she was trying to be on explode. So the reason I'm telling you this is that the message you give yourself is the message you live with. So that's an example of moving from the inside out.
What was the book she wrote?
Holy Woman. She didn't write the book. Sarah Rigler wrote the book. But it's her story. It's in the, I think it might be even in the Neve Library. It's an amazing book, and it's well written. Okay. So people sometimes move from the outside in, which is a whole other thing. How do people move from the outside in? So the way this happens is called a culturalization. You grow up in a certain culture and that becomes your normal. So if that's changed, you could develop a new normal from the outside in. So I'm going to give you, again, I don't want to give you a tragic example, so but I'll give you a better example. I'll give you another tragic example. During the Soviet era, what would sometimes happen is the people were sent to the Gulag. Do you know what the Gulag was? There are vast stretches of land in Siberia, bigger than all of Israel, that are cold and they're sort of like plain. No, things don't really grow that much because of the cold, but it's not covered with ice. Okay, so it's called the Gulag, and they would send criminals there. So they didn't even have to build fences or jails because there's no place a person can go from there. You could walk and walk and walk until you die and still not see anything. So they would send people there, and they built camps for them and forced them to do all sorts of work, cutting down trees, whatever. So an especially horrible thing that they would do was sometimes to punish the parents. They would send people to the Gulag with their children. So their children in the Gulag. The parents often died, or sometimes didn't, but they never had enough food to give themselves and also to support children. What do you think happened to the children in the Gulag who didn't die? How did they survive? Think of yourself. Do you remember yourself at 8? You were in the 4th grade. You remember yourself? So if you were like in this horrific place, no parents, how would you survive? Where would you get food from? The children were all thieves. They had to steal to survive. They were all ruthless. Okay, some of them were killers. So if you woke up in the middle of the night and you saw a child in your room, what would you do? What?
Like, be nice to her, like, ask her if she's okay, like, it's a child.
It's a child, but this child is there to steal your food.
Oh, they knew that?
All the children were thieves because there's no way for them there was no way for them to survive. The child's there to steal your food, maybe to steal your shoes and try to sell them. Maybe to kill you and take everything you own. What would you do? You would what? Either attack him or pick him up, throw him out of your room and lock the door. Okay, you could see this? So this is how they grew up. Okay, now a lot of them, of those, again, most of the children died, but of those who survived, they were vicious. So they come to Israel. Do you think that they're a lost cause? Let's say this child who's been in the Gulag for 2 years and is vicious, he comes to Israel. Is there any way you could turn this child into a normal person?
Yeah.
How would you do it?
With love and care.
So concretely, you take him to, let's say, a boarding school. He has no parents, remember, so he has to go to someplace with a boarding facility. And his instinct is, if you put him in a room with 2 other children, is to steal everything they have as fast as he can. So what they did, because these children were unadoptable, nobody was willing to adopt them. They were the wrong age also, because little children couldn't survive. So the kids who survived were like 8. They would begin like from 8, 9, 10. So they were unadoptable. They would be put in boarding facilities because nobody wanted them. But the madrichim and the madrichot were instructed, give them what they need before they have to ask. So they get there, you don't say, here's supper. They're worried what's going to happen after supper. Here's supper, and here's what you could take to your room. We're eating again at 7. So you give them like 10 sandwiches. You understand what I'm saying? So slowly they became more secure. Did that stop them from stealing?
No.
Sort of, okay? So when I say sort of, it reached a point where they didn't steal as viciously the way they did in the Gulag, because they didn't need to survive. But stealing things that they wanted still happened. If another child had a watch and they didn't have a watch, if another child had nice shoes and they liked them better than their own shoes, the stealing was very hard. How would you get them beyond stealing at all? How would you get them to not steal something they want? No one succeeded. Okay, I want to make this clear. This is not a success story. It's a tragic story. The kids basically would still steal, even into adulthood. Okay, but what did happen is that they would steal primarily from people who they either didn't know or don't care about. Okay, so with this, here's the story that I want to tell you. My daughter Devorah taught in a Russian school in which these children were her students. They liked her a lot. She's fun. She was young when she was teaching. She would do games and stories and whatever. One day, the principal came in and wanted to talk to her about attendance or something like that. So he's in the doorway. She just went her back is to the class. Her pocketbook was on the desk. The principal, who knows them, said, Devorah, take your bag. And she said, the kids would never steal from me. What do you think the truth is? Did they take her wallet or didn't they take her wallet? What do you think? She was only out for maybe 5 minutes. They didn't take her wallet, but they did take her money. You understand? They left her bus ticket, they left her identity card because they liked her, but they took her money. Okay, so how could you change them? The only way you could change a child like that is over years. It doesn't happen in 1 day or 2 days. If they're seeing not only that they don't have to steal, but they have to make bonds with people to the point that they could be empathetic enough to other people, they realize, if I steal her money, then she has no money. And that bothers me because I feel a bond with her. This takes years. Could it happen? It could, but not in a school setting. That has to happen one-to-one. Okay, clear? So all of this movement that happens is from the outside in. Nobody can make them think differently because these thoughts are not rational thoughts. These thoughts are thoughts that endured over a long period of time. This is clear? So to understand this better, people didn't understand this until recently. Relatively recently, they discovered, do you know what I'm talking about when I talk about neural passages? That if a person does something many times, your brain actually now has a little road. So these kids had a trigger. Food equals what? Take. Okay, so they have to make whole new roads. This will have to take many, many, many actions. Okay, so actions leave a stronger imprint than thoughts. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
So if you understand this, you'll understand why Judaism is primarily a religion of deeds. So it isn't that the deed has only integral value for what it is. The deeds change the way you think. If you do the same deeds again and again and again, it changes the way you think. So you're going to be learning about proper speech in the next class. For instance, if you learn to speak positively about people, what happens in the course of time? You feel positive towards people. You look at people optimistically. Okay, this is clear? So the Torah's view is you could actually change the way you think through deeds.
There's like this saying that I learned in Hebrew. Acharei hamaasim mamshichem halavavot.
B'diuk.
And it's like after your actions goes your heart.
Right.
kind of like fake it till you make it.
Yeah, it's fake it till you make it. So the scholars knew this thousands of years ago, but they couldn't describe it in scientific terms. Now they even know this scientifically. Fake it till you make it works, okay? So I'm going to tell you the context in which the scholars use this very well-known phrase, okay? In earlier times there were sacrificial offerings. One of the first ones recorded in the Torah was when the Jews left Egypt. God said that they had to take a lamb. A lamb was worshipped by the Egyptians as a god and sacrifice it, okay? They had to put some of the blood on the doorposts, where today we have mezuzahs, okay? And it was said, and when you do this, eat it like a free man eats. Think about how free people eat and how slaves eat. How do you think a slave eats?
Like quickly and like looking around all the time.
Quickly, looking around to be sure nobody's going to take the food, eating every last drop. Okay, so it says, eat like a free man. Don't even break the bones. You don't have, like, you could divide it into pieces, but after that, like, don't feel you have to like take your knife and get every little crack of meat in. Okay, got it? Okay. So the Sefer HaChinuch, which is a very interesting book, it literally means the book of education. It was a book that was written by an anonymous author. Nobody knows with absolute certainty who wrote it. During a time when the Jews were being persecuted to such a large degree that he wasn't sure he would live to raise his children. So because of that, he wrote a book for them, in which every mitzvah in the Torah is discussed. And each one has 3 segments. Here's what the mitzvah is, here's how to do it, here's what it means. And it's short. Okay, clear? So you have the mitzvah of not breaking the bones of the Pesach offering. Okay? Here's the mitzvah. We don't do it anymore. This is only when they were in Egypt. Okay? How do you do it? You carve up the meat in large slices. You don't break the bones by using a smaller knife or a fork. What's it about? What's its root? That when you leave Egypt, you feel free. What comes forth in contemporary halacha? Do you all have seders on Pesach? How many of you have seders? Okay. So what do your parents serve if you go to your parents' house? What do they serve? Peanut butter sandwiches? No, what do they serve? The closest that they could get, given everybody has a different style, but the closest they can get to gourmet 5-star. Is that true? Okay, so for some people it's more simple, for some people it's more sophisticated, but they do like a feast. Where does that come from? From the idea of what you do affects who you are. You eat like a free man, you feel like a free man. Okay, so that's the effect of deeds. So what we're going to be speaking about are 3 different categories of mitzvot and choosing deeds from each category. So here are the categories of mitzvot. Some mitzvot are called chukim. The word chok literally means that which is engraved.
Sorry, how do you spell that?
Chet, in English or in Hebrew?
English, please.
C-H-U-K-I-M. So a chok is something that's engraved into physical nature, but there could be a mitzvah that tells you how to respond to this. So an example of this would be the laws of Nida, where sexual desire is part of human nature that's engraved into the world. What to do with this has halachas. Okay, clear? Another category are called eidot, which means mitzvot that bear witness to some event. Like Pesach bears witness to the Exodus, Shabbos bears witness to the creation. The third category is called mishpatim, which are laws of justice that we would come to on our own, more or less. Okay, so which category do you want to start with? I'm going to pick one from each. Which category interests you the most? Chukim, eidot, or mishpatim? Chukim. Okay, so the kosher laws are chukim. So what that means is the need to eat is not something you could decide or not. Nobody could say, I'm going to go on the ultimate diet. No more shopping, no more cooking, no more eating. Okay, that's not a choice. You have to eat. The question is what and how will that change you? So basically the kosher laws have three main halachot, three main laws. The first is you're only allowed to eat certain animals, not others. The second is, and even when you have one of those animals, it has to be killed in a specific way called shchita. The third is, and even after the animal was killed through shchita, you can't eat it until it's either salted to get the blood out or roasted open in open fire to get the blood out. Okay? And the final law is you can't have meat and milk. Not in the same meal, not on the same plate. There has to be a long wait between them. So now let's understand it. Okay, so the first thing is that these laws relate to eating. Does eating change you? Let's think about the way people eat. Do you think anybody thinks that eating changes the way you feel or relate?
Yes.
Of course, otherwise there wouldn't be a million restaurants. Eating definitely changes you. What does eating do? It makes you associate pleasure and closeness with a specific venue. Okay, clear? Okay. So eating meat. Are any of you vegetarians? Oh, good. Okay, so the Torah did not initially permit meat. It became permitted after the flood. Why do you think the Torah permits meat? Doesn't require meat, just permits meat.
Like in a pinch, in a situation where there's no one around.
Okay, so A, the world's a big place. If you're going to be a vegetarian in Finland, what are you going to eat? Ice. Okay, clear? Nothing grows there. Okay, clear? So one is if you're in a pinch, and there's another idea. The other idea is that on an instinctive level, people recognize that there's hierarchy and that humans occupy a different place than other beings. So I want to illustrate the hierarchy. Most of the world is inanimate, is mineral. Mineral supports vegetation, is that true? But there's less vegetation than there is mineral life. But vegetation does more than mineral life does. Like a blade of grass could photosynthesize, grow, a rock doesn't. Okay, mineral life and vegetation support animal life. Animals could do much more than vegetation can. Animals could see, hear, have primitive emotions, could get where they want to get, mate, hunt. They do many, many things. So they're less numerically present than vegetation, but they could do more. Humans could do more than animals. What could humans do that animals don't do?
Feel speech.
We could speak in a much more articulate fashion. Anything else?
Consciousness,
We have consciousness. We could make moral choices.
spiritual growth.
We have spiritual growth. An animal is wired to be what it is. It doesn't change spiritually. An elephant is an elephant is an elephant, but a person could be Hitler or be Mother Teresa. Okay, yeah? Okay, we're creative. We have aesthetic sensitivities. But we're far fewer than other animals. Okay? What do we support? Vegetation supports animals. Animals, vegetation, and minerals all support humans. What do humans support? If you were to take every human being off the planet, what would happen to the rest of the planet?
Would grow freely.
Greener, nicer, better. Okay, clear? So everything is aimed towards us. Do people always acknowledge this? No. What happens when a human sees themselves as being the prisoner of their own instincts as much as an animal is? What happens then? Are there humans who think of themselves as animals? Any of you read philosophy? You like philosophy? If you read Camus, Camus described himself as being like an animal on the beach, just enjoying the sun. Are there people like this? Sure. So people like that don't use the human side of themselves, which is quite tragic for them. So before the flood, when the world in a general sense was on a higher spiritual plane, so eating animals was forbidden for reasons I have to still tell you. But after the flood, one of the reasons it's permitted is because it's good for humans to acknowledge the line separating them from animals. It's a healthy thing for human beings to notice that they're not horses and cows. So the vegetarians who I know, and I even have friends who are vegans, everybody is an individual, but they would sit on leather chairs or wear leather shoes. So the reason why you don't feel guilty when you do this is because there is an instinctive recognition of humans being different. So there's no requirement that humans not eat animals, and there's a reason to not eat animals, and I want to tell you why. There are physical reasons not to also. Certainly red meat isn't the healthiest food, but besides all of that, there's one reason that has to do with what we said, acharei ha-ma'asim nimshachim halevavot. One has to do with that, and the other is deeper. Okay, suppose you go out and kill an animal every day. Every day you kill a chicken from your barnyard, and then you make it kosher and serve one part for you, one part for him, 2 for the kids. Let's say you do that. After a while, is killing something that you even think about? No. So one reason is that eating animals could brutalize us. This is why it's not required. And there's another reason. The other reason is, you know how people say you are what you eat? You ever heard people say this? Is this true biologically? Yeah, your body is made out of what you eat. How long does it take before your body makes all new cells? 7 years. It's like, So you eat something, it becomes you. So the laws of kashrut are meant to mitigate the limiting factors. So the first law, as we said, is only, if you're going to eat meat, only certain animals. The animals are recognizable by their having both split feet and chewing their cud. Do you know what chewing cud means? Yes? Humans have 1 stomach, which is enough. Okay, animals have anywhere between 2 and 7 stomachs. A cow has 7 stomachs. Can you imagine that? So a cow eats grass, it goes up to here, then it regurgitates the grass, chews it again, now it could penetrate the stomach and go here, until finally it goes to the last stomach, and then it's integrated into the body or rejected. So that's why cows seem to be eating all of the time. Okay. So the reason I'm telling you this is that the animals that are permitted, the domesticated animals, are ones whose natures are not antithetical to ours. So even though nobody would say, wow, I wish you were more like a cow isn't savage. It's not a predator. So you're limited in which animals you could eat. The next is you have to kill the animal. So there's a process called shchita. Do you know how that works? So it's a woman could in theory be a shochet, but I never heard of a woman going into this line of work. Okay, he has to have a knife. The knife is called a chalef. The chalef is like a big blade on a handle. It doesn't look like a regular knife. Okay, so the man who becomes a shochet has to be skilled, requires a 6-month course, an apprenticeship, to be able to sever the animal's jugular vein, windpipe, and esophagus all at once, without back and forth motions, without exerting a lot of pressure. This is a huge skill, especially with a large animal. What do you think the effect of this is? The animal has to be killed by a shochet. What? The animal doesn't suffer because death is instantaneous, but also the shochet doesn't become dehumanized. He has to be so extremely careful to see that he doesn't cause any unnecessary pain to the animal. It's a huge effect on the shochet. So from that angle, again, his care, he has to inspect the knife all of the time. The knife has to be so sharp. One of the things you could tell about a shochet, they have to grow a nail, and he has to be able to split the nail without exerting pressure. It has to be that sharp. So this is it's a skill, and it keeps the shochet from being brutalized. The next thing, so we have 2 things of the 4. Only animals that aren't antithetical to us, only through shchita. The next is not eating the animal's blood. The blood, after I should do this on a person, even myself, after the jugular vein is severed, this like huge amount of blood gushes out. Okay, so that blood is just discarded, but there's still blood there. So it has to be eliminated by either salting or being roasted over an open fire, as I said. So in earlier times, people knew they had to do this, and today we know how it works biologically.
Wait, I didn't understand that there can't be blood.
Right. The blood that you see when you cut meat and you see red. So there are two different kinds of blood. One is blood that's life force, meaning it's flowed. So when the animal died, that blood stops. Some of it remains in the animal's body and is removed through salting or roasting. The blood that's left is blood that was already adhering to limbs and organs. It's called dam tamtzit, and it's not considered to be, certainly in the kosher laws, the same as the other blood.
So that's okay? 'Cause
That's
there
okay.
Is blood, but
It is, yeah, but it's chemically different. It's different. Okay, so in the Torah it says 3 times, don't eat the blood because the blood is the animal's soul. So how does that work? The whole endocrine system of the animal flows through its veins. The blood is the animal's soul. So I want to give you 2 references to this that you could see. One is in today's zoos. I'm not saying, by the way, that this is right. I'm just saying that this is what they do. It's to their interest to see that the animals are easier to handle, right? So they don't give the animals, they don't give lions and tigers, they don't give them red meat. Now again, this may be wrong morally because a lion wants red meat. Because not eating the blood will make the animal less hostile. But a place where you see it much more, any of you South African? No, okay. If you were South African, you would be able to demonstrate this by talking about their rituals more. North of South Africa is Kenya, okay? And from Kenya all the way down to South Africa, all the way east and west to South Africa. It's a huge tribe. There's a tribe called the Maoris. The Maoris are herdsmen. Part of their ritual is they like to take themselves into a frenzy. How do they do this? By eating cow blood and urine. And they do end up in a frenzy. So the idea there is that blood really does give you whatever the animal's nature is. Okay, so going back to Acharei Hamasim Nimshachim Halevavot. So we're creating new panels here. Yes, we'll eat meat because we're not animals, but no, we're not going to eat them in a way in which we become more bestial. This makes sense to you? So, especially when you're talking about shechita, this is all for the human. Have any of you ever lived on farms? Okay, if you were to live on a farm or a kibbutz, you would have a different attitude towards animals than you probably do. Before I lived on a moshav, the only animals I knew were Disney animals or pets. So pets sort of pick up, a lot of human traits. On the moshav, I got to see real animals. The animals are very different than people. So I'll give you an example. You've ever heard the phrase, he's running around like a chicken without a head? There's a reason for this phrase, okay? That means a chicken, like their heads are small, their brains are undeveloped. A chicken will keep on running, like the brain didn't transmit to the body yet, or the body didn't receive from a brain message saying, you're dead. Okay, got it? Okay, well. You've ever heard the phrase like sheep to the slaughter? You've ever heard that phrase? So we did not raise sheep, we did raise chickens. Our neighbor raised sheep. So the shochet would come twice a year to slaughter the sheep and to bring them to the plants to be produced for marketing. So you had all these sheep. The people had a 3-sided corral. They would lead the ram into the corral, kill him. All the other sheep see their fellow sheep being killed. And what do? They could run away. There's a whole empty side. What do? They stand there with what I can only call a very sheep expression. Online, so they're not like people. So for that reason, I don't think a chicken or a sheep really would know the difference if they were slaughtered with a knife that was somewhat less sharp or it took another extra second. But the person does. Okay, clear? Even cows, which are much more intelligent than sheep or chickens, They don't recognize their babies the next day. That's why it's easy to milk them. Oh, right, birth. Did I give birth, or it was she who gave birth? I don't remember. Oh, well, here's the farmer with his milking apparatus. I guess it's supposed to go there. Okay. They're not like people, but we have to treat them with a great deal of humanity because they feel pain. And for that, you don't have to be too sophisticated. Clear? So that's how the chukim work. They tell you how to operate within the laws of nature. Any questions on the kosher laws or chukim in general? Okay, 3 other kinds. We're going to have time for one more. What do you want? Eidot or mishpatim? Okay, a law of justice, like don't murder. Do all societies have laws against murder? What society doesn't? No, they actually all do. The way they define murder varies from society to society. The Jewish version of don't murder is don't kill someone who's not a threat to you. A lot of societies don't have it that way. It's don't kill anyone unless they're not a member of your tribe or whatever. Okay, don't murder. In the West, do all legal systems exclude murder? Yeah. So you could think, who needs the Torah? We would come to this ourselves. So I want to tell you the difference between the Torah and human law. In the West, as things are today, let's say there's a murder. Is it accurate to say all murderers will get the same treatment in court? Everything depends on who the murderer is and who the victim is. So you remember the case with, what was that athlete's name? OJ, was it?
Simpson.
Yeah. Okay. He basically got away with it, no? If he was old, ugly, and poor, do you think he would have gotten away with it? No. So what the Torah does is it gives you an unchanging code. It's not meant to relate to human consciousness, which is subjective, but made to relate to Hashem's plan for the world. So that's it for now.